You are listening to Supplement Source, the official podcast of the Council for Responsible Nutrition. And now your host, Jeff Ventura.
Hello, and thank you for listening to Supplement Source. I'm your host, Jeff Ventura, and I am so excited to welcome to our show today Judy Blatman, who is a former CRN, part of the CRN family, still in many ways, an extension of the CRN family. And Judy, you've been so wonderful today to come on and talk to us a little bit about an announcement that we just made about the CRN Radical Science Trailblazer Award. And this year, it's particularly special because it is being commemorated in memory of Annette Dickinson, who started out at CRN as the first staff employee back in 1973, I believe. And you, Judy, of course, knew her personally, worked with her for many years. She was not only your boss, but I understand a friend. Tell us a little bit about your relationship with Annette. Just give us a little backstory about that. I'd be curious to hear.
First of all, Jeff, thank you so much to you and CRN for having me on. I was so honored to see the announcement that you made that is honoring Annette Dickinson because she was an amazing person. She was an amazing president at CRN, and she was a real trailblazing leader for the whole industry. So I think it's very apropos. As you said, I did consider her not only my boss, but also a friend. And she and I stayed in touch long after she left. First, she was doing consulting for CRN, and so I got to stay in touch with her that way. But then even after that, we talked a lot during COVID, and what I'm hoping to do is really let your listeners know about the Annette Dickinson that I knew, who they may not have known. And I'm happy to do that and talk about her leadership.
Yeah, let's get into that. You know, I think we talk about leadership, and I think that goes hand in hand with really talking about someone's legacy. And certainly it was a significant loss, not only for CRN, but for the industry. Tell me a little bit about that, about her legacy and her leadership and sort of what hole that leaves behind.
When I think about her legacy, I think of it in three buckets. And I think the first bucket has to be the science. The second is responsibility. And the third is that her people really mattered to her. And, you know, we lost two giants this year, not only Annette, but Michael McGuffin. And I think that's a big hit with both of them for the industry. Both of them would leave behind strong legacies. But in terms of Annette, as you said, she was the first employee at CRN, and then she was the president for about 3 years at CRN. And before I get into the science part, I think there's one thing that I want you to know about who she was, which infused her leadership values. So I was a little bit nervous about her being president, and I'll go into that a little later, but she resigned from her position in 2005, and she had come on board as president in 2002, and I had really grown to admire the way she was leading the organization. And for me personally, and for the organization, I was rather sad and disappointed. And I asked her why. I said, "You're just getting started. What's going on?" And she said that she did it because she had made a commitment to her husband, Charlie, that when they retired, they would move to Minneapolis, where he had this very large extended family. And it was important for him that the time was right at that point. So, you know, I couldn't fault her for that. I was sad to see her go, but I think it's part of her commitment to keeping her promises, to doing what was right, was a big part of her leadership style. So if we talk about her effect on science, that is definitely her lasting legacy, is making science the cornerstone of CRN. And another thing about her leadership is that we had this very long tagline at the time that I can't even remember what it was. And I went to her and I said, I want to give you a tagline that really means something. And so I pulled in the amazing Gretchen Powers, another trailblazer, and the two of us developed what became CRN's tagline or mantra for many, many years under her leadership, and that was the science behind the supplements. And Gretchen certainly did the design, and Annette just loved it. And in credit to her, when I presented the idea before the actual idea, I think she was a little skeptical, but she said, sure, go ahead, you do it and come back to me. And that was one of the things about her that was really amazing leadership wise. And that comes to the third point, which is her people mattered to her. One of the things about great leaders are that they really take into account how they're going to make sure that the people they're leading are also growing. And she was wonderful at that. And then the second, so I went out of order, was responsibility. And I think that, it looks like from what I see with CRN, that's really the tagline now, is responsibility is our middle name. And that is so important. And that's under Steve's legacy. And I think it did start with Annette. Annette she was a nutrition scientist, and she was interested in the vitamin companies. And for her, the herbals were something out of her realm to begin with. CRN was started with some of the real responsible vitamin companies. And the idea was to have a home for those larger responsible companies. And that's where she started. To her credit, when she became president, she totally embraced the other products in the industry, but she wanted to make sure that they also still had science behind them. So those are the three things that for me remain her legacy: the science, the responsibility, and caring for her team.
Tell me about the hopes that she, and it's hard. I mean, it's hard to sort of answer this, but what do you think Annette would hope for the future of this industry as the next generation of leaders come up in the industry? What do you think she would have hoped for?
So my opinion is that first and foremost, she would have wanted them to pay attention to the science and not to let a good product idea get ahead of the science. I think also she would have been totally intrigued by where the science is going. So I'm working on an article for one of the trade associations that talks about that now. And, the RCT has always been the gold standard. But there's a shift in science, in part, I think, because the RCTs are not always the best way to study, certainly the nutritional products, although they have worked. And so I think there is this feeling of, as industry leaders, how can we approach the science in a different way? So companies are looking at biomarkers more. They're looking to do RCTs, but beyond the traditional ones. You still want to do them rigorously, but you want to go in a different direction. I think Radical is one of those companies that I'm talking with, and they're certainly known for that. And, it's also to look for things. Personalized nutrition is a trend that companies are looking at. Now, I don't know if she would have been on board with all of that, but I think, Annette was a traditionalist, but she was also somebody who was always open and curious and listened about new ideas. Although I will say that I tried to sell her on something that was way ahead of its time. In the later years when she was consulting, I wanted to do a scientific study that would look at supplements from the perspective of the healthy habits of healthy people in a way to discover what works. And it was based upon CRN's own market research that showed that people who take dietary supplements are more likely to engage in other healthy habits, like trying to eat a healthy diet and exercise more regularly. She kind of shut me down pretty quickly on that. I wonder if she would feel differently today as the science has expanded.
You had mentioned before that you were a little trepidatious about her taking the presidential role at CRN. Why did you have doubts?
So when I started at CRN, I had been hired to do something really was to elevate the communications function. And CRN already had a very strong reputation with journalists and important journalists based on the science. The three scientists at CRN, Annette Dickinson, John Hathcock, John Cartolina, they all had great reputations. But what I quickly found out when I got there was they would get a media call, they would take the media call. There was no process in place. There was no reason why they were taking the media call except to answer the questions. And you understand the communication professional.
Yeah, you're giving me hives.
I shake when I think about it. And someday I want to come back on this podcast and talk to you about how the media has changed. But so the scientists, they were a little non-receptive to my coming in and trying to put these kinds of things into place. And I had been hired by John Cordero, or J.B. Cordero, as some know them, and he was all on board with doing this with communications. And when he left and Annette became president, I thought, oh my God, am I still going to have a job, And she said to me, she said, because I knew she didn't really like talking with the press, she would do it, and she was very good at it because she was very good at explaining things succinctly. And she said, Judy, I may not like it, but the members want this. And it's a member organization, and I promise you, I will do what you need me to do. And I think from that point on, I felt a lot better about it. And then when I started to work with her as president, I realized that she had a very different management style than what I was used to. And I think it was something that now is more apparent. And I think that more companies, more organizations are using it. It's something that really focuses on diversity in opinions and having other people have a voice in things, really listening, which she was very good at. But at the time, it was very bold, and I wasn't sure that I was really going to enjoy it because I was used to what was the status quo at the time was you were hired for your expertise and you did your job. You didn't get into somebody else's lane. Yes, you collaborated with other departments, but you did what you did. They did what they did. No one questioned your communications, if you were in communications as I was. And Annette had a very different approach. She wanted to open it up to everybody for everything. She would have staff meetings where everyone was invited to give their opinions on things that in the beginning I thought, well, you're a lobbyist. What do you know about how I work with the press? But at the end of the day, what I found pretty quickly is that I really enjoyed it because it did allow for other people to feel valued. There was really no senior leadership. It was more, you're the receptionist, you are welcome, and we want your opinions. And I think it really worked. And for me personally, it gave me an opportunity to do things and to learn things that I otherwise wouldn't have been involved with.
Judy Blatman of Judy Blatman Communications, reflecting on Annette Dickinson, who is now the name behind the Trailblazer Award. Incidentally, the finalists will be announced in July, and the person who is chosen will be officially recognized at CRN's annual conference, which is at the Ritz-Carlton in St. Louis, and that's going to be October 8th through 10th. Judy, thanks so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Jeff. I really enjoyed talking with you.